Good evening, YouTube. Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully, you guys are doing well. Boy, oh boy, things have taken a turn. We have started out the day thinking, okay, maybe there was a chance of Friday's severe threat, mainly staying at a slight risk. We were hoping for that. We knew there was a chance that it would go to enhanced, but not only has that enhanced risk popped up, we've seen something that is a little bit more alarming. So we're hoping, and I mean really hoping, that this doesn't come to fruition, but I've been seeing a nasty trend over the last couple of days. I brought it up a little bit in yesterday's video, but we're going to get more in depth with it. And we may even make a video at some point in the Weather Nerd 101 list. But it's about storm relative felicities. And when we see those kinds of trends over areas that are expecting severe weather, it can get pretty alarming. That being said, before we even get into that, we also have to take a look at what we have going on right now over the country. And you can almost see this storm system coming in. This is going to be our big player that starts our severe weather off here. You can even see the almost the setup for directional shear as we speak right now. If you look really closely, I'm going to circle this for you as best as I can because I know it's going to be hard to see. But if you look at this little section right here that's moving, you can see those clouds almost moving in somewhat of a northerly direction right here. Up against this, which is moving, this feature, which is moving in this direction. This has been causing scattered showers and thunderstorms all throughout the day across this region. But simply put, you can almost see where those two different wind directions are almost interacting, which is more so right here right now. Let me try to draw an X here. I'm a little tired, so if it looks crazy, I apologize. That being said, that's what we have going on right now, and this is what's going to be setting the stage for our severe weather event. We already know what our warm and moist sectors are going to look like. We've known this for a while, actually. So we're not really going to get into the warm and moist sector. We're going to look more into the finer severe parameters. We're going to look at lapse rates. We're going to look at the storm relative felicities, like I talked about, the Cape values, etc. But also we have to make sure that we are keeping score of everything else that's been going on. We've had some snowfall going on this week, over the course of this week, especially over today, the course of today. We still have some snow ongoing across parts of the southern Sierras, and then across parts of the Rockies. And then, of course, over towards the northwest, it's a similar deal. Looks like we're starting to even see the next round of the atmospheric river coming into play here. But you also have to keep an eye on this atmospheric river now, not just for the threat of flooding, but severe weather. And we've learned that today, even across a small portion of LA, as there was actually a reported tornado. There was actually video of a tornado that was on the ground just outside of Los Angeles this morning. Who would have thought, right? But yeah, this didn't have any sort of marginal risk. There wasn't even a tornado warning for the storm. It just caught everybody by surprise. If you want, actually, down the line, maybe I might do an analysis or something to kind of go over just what the heck happened, because it caught me by surprise, that's for sure. And I find it interesting how that setup even occurred here. Just got a notification while I was at work, and I saw that there's a tornado over LA. I was like, wait, what? That actually rubbed my eyes because I thought I was sleeping or something still. That being said, I'm rambling. There also was a marginal risk for severe storms. There was one hail report over towards Ohio today, towards western Ohio. Nothing significant beyond that. It was pretty much what you would expect for a run-of-the-mill marginal risk type day. So a couple of quick things before we get into the meat of our video, which is going to be the severe weather. Just a quick look at some of the totals that we got leading into this morning. We probably will see these on the increase by tomorrow morning when the next run comes in for this. But, of course, the higher elevations are going to be what ends up getting the most snow here, especially towards southern Colorado, where we're seeing up to about 3 feet, probably locally higher totals. Sierra Nevada, Could see up to about 2 feet there, and just very scattered pockets. I don't expect to really see too much snow towards the valleys here. It's going to be mainly towards the mountains and the highest of elevations. Then over towards the Dakotas, we had some moderate snow. Some of it probably was a little bit heavy too. We could see some areas even getting up to about 6 inches on the line between Minnesota and North Dakota, and then northern Minnesota. We also have to look for the potential of maybe 6 to even slightly higher totals in local areas. But other than that, snowfall has been relatively on the light side. Now, when we go to the rainfall, so far between yesterday and this morning, it's a pretty similar deal. We're obviously going to see these rainfall totals on the rise between now and tomorrow. So, of course, this is very much prone to changing. Unfortunately, though, any rainfall at this point across the West Coast is insult to injury. This area has been, the West Coast in general, just has been hit very hard this year by the multiple atmospheric rivers, and unfortunately we're still dealing with the same problem right now. So hopefully at some point this will end and things can get better across this region here. If there's one upside to be had, though, that for the most part the drought across this area is just about gone, thankfully. I know that drought has been plaguing, but to get it all at once is the only problem that we really have with this here. I don't know I don't know how some people really feel about the drought at this point. It's one extreme or the other. I'm pretty sure a lot of people like some balance in between. That being said, let's get into the analysis here. So here we are looking at the Storm Prediction Center. Here was our marginal risk today. Here are our storm reports. The only two, and we already discussed those. Slight risk on Thursday. We kind of already touched on it. We're briefly going to be touching on that. We're mainly going to be looking at the hail threat more than anything else. Not to say that there isn't a tornado and wind threat, but hail is definitely going to be the dominant threat, as most of these storms will end up being elevated. There are good parameters at the surface, but there is like a small pocket. There's small pockets of cold air aloft towards the lower to mid levels of the atmosphere, and in turn, that's going to inhibit these storms from being connected at all levels of the atmosphere, especially towards the low levels where you would expect increased potential for tornadoes. It's far different tomorrow, or Friday, I should say, the following day. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at what has potentially changed with our slight risk. Has expanded a little bit further to the north here. We now got Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Norman involved in there. But outside of that, nothing too far from what we saw yesterday here. And then, of course, the marginal risk, which expands into Missouri and then into Illinois here. Again, with you guys, main threat is hail. I don't expect anything along the lines of tornadoes or wind there. I think the greatest tornado threat is going to be on the western fringe of this right here towards Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Fort Sill, and maybe even Wichita Falls here. So here's a tornado threat here. It does expand a little further south. It's just to the north of Abilene. But again, it's a marginal threat. Elevated storms do not do well with tornado potential. In fact, they just tend to not produce them at all most of the time. Very rarely does it turn out any differently. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard of any elevated supercells producing tornadoes. Or at least not at first. Anyone know anything about that? Feel free to correct me. But that being said, here's the wind threat. A little bit more notable to the south here too, but still marginal. And the hail threat is the big topic here, including a threat for significant hail, which would be hail above 2 inches in diameter. And then we also have our marginal risk up here towards the north here, leaning mostly towards hail. The other two threats don't even make it that far. So that's what we have going on for Thursday. Friday, we are not within the 48-hour time frame, so we don't get a good look at the tornado threat or any of the other probable hazards. I think all hazards are possible this day. In fact, I'm pretty confident in it. But what we can see is we can look at the probabilistic outlook. I'm trying to make sure I'm pronouncing this right. But you can see our enhanced risk here. It's a 30% area, and then we also have it stretching back towards some of the slight risk, even towards the west. We don't know what all the hazards are, what the percentage of this is all the hazards, or which particular hazard we might be dealing with, but I'm leaning more so towards the tornado threat now than I did yesterday for sure. I've been seeing more trending towards a more subtle type of forcing going on, and that always tends to lend more so to a tornado threat than anything else, because now you have discrete supercells, and discrete supercells don't have to compete with other storms to get the other parameters, wind shear, moisture, and all the other factors you would need in order to produce. And then these storms will be able to sustain for much longer as well. So we could see prefrontal supercells in potentially even in abundance ahead of time, and then eventually a line of storms which has the potential for producing significant damaging winds and also tornadoes as well. So a dangerous day could be taking shape for Friday. One thing that I find very alarming is when I read the synopsis a little earlier, supercell thunderstorms. They particularly mention supercell thunderstorms capable of all hazards, including strong tornadoes, are possible across the lower Mississippi Valley on Friday. So here is what they are talking about for the lower Mississippi Valley here. I mean, we already knew the expectation of the moist and warm sector here. So we already have moderate buoyancy and then very strong mid-level flow. We've been seeing the jet stream for the longest here. We have, but the problem is the long hordeographs. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll pull up the sounding in a minute and we'll discuss that just a little bit. But substantial low level veering here. The environment will be very favorable for supercells. Definitely not something that you want to hear if you're not looking for a tornado outbreak. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video here. So here is a perfect example of forcing. I've mentioned this in a couple of my videos on the Weather Nerd 101 list. I'll have that link up in the description. But here's what we have going on right now. This is the NAM that we are looking at, not the NAM 3 kilometer. This is just a traditional NAM. And on Thursday, we have a little bit stronger forcing than we do on Friday over our severe weather areas. In fact, it's about the same, I would say. But the best chance for storms to fire probably will be around 21Z to 03Z, somewhere along that time frame. The jet streak is not very impressive with this. There is something to be had there, and maybe we could see a couple of damaging windstorms and tornadoes here. But all this will depend on the timing of parameters here. Again, with the storms being elevated, it's pretty hard to really get those other two factors into play here. But given the warm sector, along with those storms interacting on the edge of that front here, and with cold air aloft as well, or at more, I would say, odd points of the atmosphere, definitely leans more so into a hail threat here, especially with so much energy in the atmosphere. We've been talking about the Cape values for Thursday for a minute, so this is no surprise to us. That being said, we know the deal for Thursday. Should keep the tornado threat down, but when we get into Friday, however, jet streak much stronger. But one thing I want you to make note of: look at these isobars. I've said it before. The tighter the isobars are into each other, like this right here, That's usually indicative of upper level forcing, very strong upper level forcing. When you start to see them get spaced out like this is not something you want to see when you're talking about a severe setup that has a lot of low-level hordeographs and storm-related felicities. This leans into a threat that favors discrete supercells. So, in other words, in case you're new to this, discrete supercells are the ones that often will end up producing tornadoes, and often the strong ones too, if parameters are right. And that's what we've been trending towards for a bit here with this setup. So whenever you see these isobars kind of spreading apart a little bit just like this is almost like a Goldilocks type setup, unfortunately. Let's hope this doesn't happen, but if this does, this could get ugly. So if you happen to be in these areas, it's not like we're new to tornadoes here, so I would expect you to know what to do. But in case you don't, I'll even try to see if I can make a little bit of extra content on the side to help along with that. But we should know what to do here. You should know where your tornado shelter is. You should have a way to get watches and warnings and all of that data easily accessible within the palm of your hand throughout the course of the day, the evening, and into the night. Have a way to be woken up in case there is a tornado warning at night, because this could be a setup that leans into a nocturnal setup as well. Because really, from pretty much, like I said earlier, from pretty much Birmingham towards Lufkin, Texas, even if you aren't exactly in the enhanced risk, you still have a threat for pretty much all hazards. Even when the discrete supercell threat transitions more into a linear threat, you can't say that there won't be embedded tornadoes within that line. That's just how good the wind profiles are with this storm system. So that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the low-level jet here. I know I'm rambling a bit, so I'm going to try to wrap things up a bit. I'm not going to skip anything, but I'm going to try to make these videos a little shorter. I'm pretty sure a few of you guys are getting tired of 30-minute videos. To a point I am, too. It's hard to make them. That being said, we can see already towards 21Z on Friday in particular. 40 knot plus jet, low-level jet here. In fact, it intensifies as we get towards 03Z here. We're getting towards 60. Some places even trying to flirt with 70 knots, which could lean into some big-time problems there. Also, for those of you who are looking towards Thursday saying, what about us? Here's why I'm not concerned about your tornado threat as well. Not only do you have elevated storms, but look at the low-level jet here. By the time we get towards OOZ, 03Z, look at this. Some of you guys are lucky to even get up to about 30 knots. You really need about 40 knots in order for there to be a considerable tornado threat. So we're not seeing that, and basically, simply put, there's not really a whole lot to go off of there. Storms could be maintained a little bit off of 20 to 30 knots, but usually that doesn't last long. So that being said, main threat becomes Friday. Look at that. And even as we head towards the morning hours of Saturday, there could still be a severe threat that exists even as far east as Georgia. I don't really lean into it too much simply because the daytime heating effect isn't really there. Temperatures probably will still be sufficient enough, though. May even have to watch towards parts of the mid-Atlantic for severe weather on Saturday again, but I'm not going to look too far into that right now. Main thing I'm concerned about is Friday. As we mentioned before, we already talked about what the Cape values look like for Thursday, and we've seen quite an uptrend on Friday. But main thing we're going to look at here is some of the more intricate parameters. Lapse rates are going to be a big thing tomorrow. Here we are looking at 21Z here. This is a little bit further to the south. This is where I think the greatest conditions for hail kind of exist right now. I find it interesting that I look towards this area, and we're not really seeing much of anything. Lapse rates are impressive, but it doesn't look like we have a storm that's popped up here. I think I clicked it at the wrong time. Okay. This should be better. There we go. And here's also a perfect example of an elevated storm sounding. When you see this kind of make a little curve to the right like this and then curve back like this, usually that's sign of an elevated storm. And then on top of that, if you look at the air temperature, that kind of is indicative of everything in and of itself here. So that being said, proof's in the pudding. And you can even see with the helicity here. It's not even a strong helicity, but look what's happened. Normally you want to see that helicity all the way down towards the 1,000 millibar range. It's just a little bit above it. So again, tornado threat, not that impressive. Very different story when we go towards Friday. We'll be looking at a sounding for Friday momentarily. The lapse rates aren't quite as impressive on Friday heading into Saturday. So the hail threat, while it will still be there, it's not going to be quite as prevalent as what it will be tomorrow. So that being said, now let's go ahead and look at the Cape. We already know that tomorrow is going to be a very Cape abundant type event, which is part of the big reason why storms will be firing over towards Texas and Oklahoma. When we head into Friday afternoon, Friday evening, Cape values are actually pretty abundant as well, but they're not. It's not an explosive environment, which is kind of what you would be wanting to look for in regards to a tornado threat here. So out here where I think some discrete storms are possible, we could see Cape getting up to about 600 to 800 joules per kilogram, and then on the front, of course, we're dealing with those much higher Cape values, getting up to 1,500 plus. If we keep that moving, this Cape really hangs in there and actually expands quite a bit to the north here towards Saturday evening. Like I said, we're going to be watching the mid-Atlantic for a severe threat here. And then when we look at surface-based Cape, very noteworthy tomorrow across the southern plains. And then when we get towards Friday, that's where we start to really have our problem here. 14, 15, even 1,600 joules plus across a large part of the Ozarks and into the southeast, especially across Mississippi. Could be an overnight storm threat. I'm gonna see if I can try and live stream this because I think I might have a shot at it. We'll see what happens with that. Now that we've discussed that, what I really want to get into here, it's actually going to be a parameter I've actually never shown on the channel here. It's the storm relative helicity. So, to explain what storm relative helicity is more or less based off of the low-level motion in the atmosphere, usually veering. It's even mentioned here when we looked at the synopsis here. So whenever we have a very strong wind shear, we often will look towards these helicities and we'll see how strong they are, and usually that'll be a telltale sign of what we're dealing with as far as severe weather is concerned. So we're looking at low-level helicities, and you'll kind of understand what I'm talking about in a minute, because you'll see when I talk about hordeographs, you'll often hear me bring up helicities. So we head towards Friday. Look what happens as we get towards Friday afternoon. I'm actually think I need to look at the 0 to 3 kilometer, because I think it paints a slightly better picture of what we could be dealing with here. So here's Thursday, and then Friday. This is where we run into our trouble here. Yeah, this is what I wanted. Because this was the image I looked at earlier. I just clicked the wrong thing. But look at that. So, to put it frankly, and I'll use an example of a particular event, the Atlanta tornado back in 2008, for example. I think I remember seeing a helicity of 130 meters squared per second squared. And this was indicative of and this ended up being indicative of an EF2 tornado. And this was for an environment that was, I would say, less than favorable for tornadic activity. If any of you storm nerds remember that event, weren't really expecting too much to occur over towards Atlanta, not until the following day. But as we all know, Mother Nature will do what she wants. That's exactly what happened. But in this situation here, this leans a little bit, not necessarily towards a super outbreak, but this is a situation where we have a very favorable environment with discrete supercells heading over an area where we have plenty of low-level helicity, and unfortunately what will end up happening is, and this isn't an impressive one, but again, look at the helicity here, 507 meters squared per second squared. And this is what I'm talking about right here. This is the low-level curve. This is a hordeograph curve. Whenever you see curvatures like this, is usually a very alarming sign. And this actually has uptrended quite a bit from yesterday. This didn't quite impress me as much as it does right now, and I do find that very alarming. It's a very good skew T chart here. So, man, this is not what we were wanting to see here. And this is on the marginal tornado threat side. I just really picked the spot more or less, but that's literally just how abundant things are over here. Just look. I mean, this is over towards Tennessee. I think the most favorable environment is actually going to be still further to the south here. 289 meters squared per second squared. Look at that. Almost 400 meters squared per second. And then that is almost a picture perfect low-level hordeograph curve. Supercell analog matches for days here too, unfortunately. So I expect this right here, which is called the significant tornado parameter. That's another parameter we can look at here. It's probably what you were expecting me to look at. I would expect this to actually go up a bit. I think 2 is a relatively low number considering everything that's in place here. Cape value isn't at 1,000, but it's more than sufficient enough. I think with other parameters in place here, it's really not going to matter what our Cape value is. If it's above 500, it's going to be a problem. But anyway, it's a very dangerous setup that we have going into place. I'm going to keep on saying it until I've pretty much blue in the face here. Please, again, if you happen to be in an area of interest for severe weather on Friday, do not play around with this. Because if this comes to fruition, it is going to be a huge problem. So please, please, please take those warnings seriously. Have a way to get them, especially as we get towards the nighttime hours. Because odds are you are not getting a visual on those storms. That being said, that's the end of this video. If you've found it useful, you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video to anyone that lives out here towards the Ozarks, towards Dixie Alley, wherever it may be. And let's not forget our friends here in the Southern Plains as well. We haven't forgotten about you either. I will probably try to still make a video in the morning. It depends on how things go with what time I get up and whether I have enough time to do so. If not, I'll try and make a post at the very least. But I want to make sure I haven't forgotten about you guys there either. But Friday in particular looks very dangerous. So please, if you could, make sure that you are doing your part in helping your fellow neighbor. That being said, enough rambling from me. This has been Tire Metalhead Weatherman. You guys have a good night, and I'll see you soon. Till then, take care.